And I'm going to share from my Canva screen this evening. So just give me a second. Okay, may you please indicate somebody who's able to unmute if you can see my screen.
Good evening, can see your screen.
Thank you so much. Okay, good evening, everyone. Today we're diving into ethical considerations, and this is not a brand new topic. It's something we have touched on before in preparation for ICE Task 3, and so this evening it's merely just pulling it into or finding the clarity that you need to be able to draw it into your proposal. It definitely will form a section in your write-up, and for some of you, you wrote it beautifully. It's going to be a matter of copying what you've written for the ICE task and working it into your current proposal or your research proposal when you get to that step of your task. So this evening, we're going to look at critical analysis and report on the ethical considerations of a study. And just a few announcements. So last week before my session, there was an AI workshop. I had a few students who asked around the recording of it. And apparently there is a playlist YouTube channel where all the recordings for the online center is loaded, but I will upload the recording on an announcement after this call again, just for those who missed it. Then the Mandalay workshop that I'm planning to run or have, I found that, let me just see if I can. So I found that a few participants who initially said, or students said that they will be able to be available on a Saturday morning, unfortunately now cannot be. And so the initial planning for having a Mendeley workshop on Saturday, the 24th of August, I'm a bit torn between continuing with it or do I pause for a second? And so I want to pose two options to you this evening. I know that you're going to have a mid-break, a midterm break in September. And so I wanted to give an option where would it be possible to tap in during that time and find a possible evening where we could have Mandalay training or a workshop on Mandalay just for an hour. It won't be longer than the normal check-in time that we have. Or would you prefer that I load a normal recording or share a link of a Mendeley workshop for you? So if you may please scan the QR code and let me know. I'm just going to pause for a second. I think it will be very useful. I also did my, before my master's, everything else was done manually. And the minute I found reference manager tools that are online, it made my life so much easier. And so I think if you give it a shot, it could be meaningful. I think some of you are responding on the chat on the Learn platform. I have shared the QR code for the Canva app as well. I'll go back to the screen to see. But I thought at least there won't be any other activities, any other submissions during that downtime. And perhaps that could be a meaningful option. So I see options that are going for the September break. And I'll reflect on all the votes this evening and make a final call at the end of the session so that we're more or less on the same page. But I promise you, it's not something that will waste your time. It's going to be a meaningful investment in yourself, in your research for this particular module, but also for your journey moving forward, as I assume some of you would participate or would fully still embark on your journey for a master's, a PhD, and so that training or research or training or workshop around Mendeley will be of benefit to you. Okay, so thank you to all the responses. I appreciate it. And so far, it looks like we're going to go with the September break, and I will send a link for your WhatsApp group, as well as another official announcement, and I'm going to keep to that date, and we will run a live session. So I'm going to share the link of the Mendeley app that you need to download on your device, and we'll have a live interactive session. So whatever we do, you're going to live in the session, practice, understand, explore with it, and pull it into your proposal and see what it looks like. And so perhaps you might not use it for your task 3, but for your summative, when you pull all of it together, you could start utilizing and practicing with it. And then you can also share your views and experiences around it as well. Okay, so task 3 was due last week, and I thought of opening up conversation this evening just for feedback. And because you were able to see each other's feedback, I thought it wouldn't impact you very much if I shared on my screen for those who I wanted to just have a conversation around. But if you do not give me consent, I would understand. You can just pop a message on the chat saying, no, I don't discuss or show my work. But you all voted on the live discussion thread and you've seen each other's work. So it's not a formal test where I've taken your marks and I'm degrading or showing you. All that I just merely want to do is give feedback for discussion purposes. Okay. So on the chat, on the discussion thread, you all voted and a number of people's names popped up. So I went with the votes as well as a few that I identified. And so one of them, Noel, was your work. On the chat, if we could give you a drum roll or a clap or a shout out. Very awesome submission. You made great effort to not only give examples of what you are saying, also referring to it by substantiating your points with your sources that you incorporated. Sources are relevant. And so just the portion of how to ensure ethical practice, the second paragraph, that in itself you can incorporate as it is into your own research already, because you're speaking about obtaining informed consent for all participants, the purpose of a study, potential risks, and then you reference it. So with that saying, you are considering what ethical steps you need to take, and all the steps you've taken, for the most part, could be linked to your current study. So well done on your task today. You also had a beautiful list of references and you're on the right track. Another one that caught my eye was Nozipo. Well done on the ICE task as well. You followed the brief. There was a discussion around a research project that will have challenges, and you then came in and said, these are the opposing or incorrect way of considering it unethically, and then also what needs to be done to prevent that. One that caught my eye was the sentence, second sentence in your first paragraph that said, if one were to report only the most severe instances of academic difficulty while excluding smoother transitions, it would result in a distorted portrayal. I like that. It's a way of adding on to what your prescribed material is saying, and that distorted portrayal is such a academic way of showing you took a deep dive into the literature to find something that links to what the prescribed material is saying, but also substantiate it in an academic way. So thank you for your submission as well. The third one I found was Bronwyn. Well done. I appreciated the depth and the steps you took and linking it to your own study around AI. I think there was quite a few of you that's doing AI-related discussions, and you wrote about insight first and introduction of your study. And then you dived into ethical research that mandates the respect and protection of the participants. Again, this could be aligned with or add on to your prescribed material. So very well done. You touched on privacy and additional aspects where collecting data methods should be considered. And that in itself will justify the data collection method chapter that we covered. And then I love the part around transparency, and I thought your submission was well-rounded, so thank you for yours as well. And there's your reference list so beautifully inserted, so good job. And then I came across Sianda, my final one. Sianda had a submission uploaded in Word format, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can share. And Sianda, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to load your complete one. I'm going to go back to the Learn platform quickly. And I just want to elaborate on a few aspects that Sianda mentions in her submission. And it was beautifully done as well. Just give me a second, it's loading. So you'll see Sianda had an addition, like a Word document that I could download. And I thought, let me share it this evening so we can just round up the discussions around and show you how much progress I see and how well you are writing. It's really beautiful to see. So question one, the question was write a non-example of ethical research. And then question two said include why this is a non-example. And you can see Sianda made effort to discuss question one, where the non-ethical example is brought in, and she said, according to Dane 2022, a non-example of ethical research practice is when, and she explains what non-example means first. Then she takes a dive into exploring the importance of it and the implications of neglecting ethical considerations, which was beautifully written, and went further to, just waiting for the document to load, to then add on to the confidentiality, being anonymous, and the difference between the two, which are key elements that are also in the prescribed material. So the only support I would ask or add on is there are elements of the resources that you incorporated that speak to what your prescribed material is saying. Bring in the prescribed material and then expand on it or build on it as you've done. You'll see it will show that you're using the foundation you were giving in this module and you build on it from there. But very beautifully written. Sianda, good effort. And then Sianda included a reference list as well. So in essence, I wanted to just reflect and show you the work you've done. And for the most part, you have really committed to the ICE task. And if you've done it really well and you have your paths written up already, it's a matter of copying that into your proposal and aligning it with what you have written in your actual personal research study. And for the most part, the 5 participants or students whose work I've shared, I'm going to send you a little reward that you will receive in the week. And it's just a matter of, I'm not bribing you, it's not unethical. I think the task initially said we will vote and the best voted students will be celebrated in some way. So I'm sending you a small celebratory aspect just to encourage you for upcoming, for our final ICE task, but also to acknowledge the commitment from those that I picked up. And it's not to say that the rest of you did not. I couldn't, then I'm going to have to give 18, I think it was about 28 submissions, but I'm going to have to give every single one, which I could not, selected the ones that caught my eye. And I wanted to thank you for making the effort. So well done. Is it food? It definitely is something you could buy food with, so that could work. But you'll let me know if it was a useful gift at the end. I am on the live chat again, so if you'd like to say something, please unmute, or on the live chat, please type a response and I will see it pop up on the live chat as well. Or ideally, I'll go back to the chat. And yes, there was a reference list omitted from the last submission, but it didn't take away from the actual task itself, and I didn't penalize for any referencing. I thought the depth of the writing was something worth acknowledging. Okay, so just to summarize the Learning Unit 3, Theme 4, and as I've mentioned and showed you in the ICE task, these are things that you've already done and you've already visited or considered already. So it's nothing new that we're going to touch on. It's merely a reminder for what you need to just make notes on to acknowledge or incorporate in your proposal as you've summarized or finalized task 3. We are reflecting on chapter 18. If you'd like to please browse there, or if you've got the online copy of it, to please visit page 300 of your textbook. So basically, the importance of ethics, you've touched on it. There's a number of it listed for you on page 301. But basically, the reason why, or the interest points for considering ethics, number one, it's to build trust with your participants. They will open up if they feel safe and if they can trust that what they are pouring into your study won't harm them in any way. We consider that it needs to add value and be credible. And also, if you are getting funding from a particular organization or a institution, that you won't risk their reputation by using or letting it seem as if the money they pour into your study is a waste or impact their reputation negatively in any way. So you need to ensure that there's value and credibility in your study in order for that funding body to fully support and be proud of what they've supported. We also consider that it needs to have benefits for the community. And so what we want to do is the data that we collect in the end should feed back into the community and be almost an answer for a gap that you identified, or it should help them or give some kind of support back to the community. In the textbook, they mention ethical obligations to the community to conduct the research in a responsible manner. So whatever we do, ultimately it's to build up the participants that we are using and not necessarily harm them in any way. I've mentioned benefit the community. There's a typo, I repeated it twice. Then also majority of our studies, we do it to improve policy. We do it to change the dynamics of things. Some of us do it to inform the textbooks that we use, the indigenous knowledge that we want to be incorporated in our textbooks that's relevant for our context. So we do it for the impact we want to bring in the broader body of knowledge, especially related to education in our case. We consider newsworthy aspects. Just one page over. And these are relevant topics that we want to emphasize. And then mainly, or one of the key things that I always put at the top of my list is my reputation. So I want to put something out there that's credible, that's viable, that's listing or considers ethics throughout in order for me to not harm myself and my reputation in any way. So your reputation as a researcher means everything. When people start in-text referencing your work, it's going to build credibility, and you want to make sure that the stuff you put out and people reference it, that it is done ethically, and that the work that you've submitted is honest and has no bias as much as possible. So there's a couple of ethical issues throughout this chapter that is mentioned, and I'm just summarizing them because we have knowledge of them all. But if you would like to clarify something or repeat something or add a point, you're more than welcome to pop it on the chat or just put up your hand to unmute at any time, so you can interject at any point. So one of the ethical issues concerning our participants that we're going to consider, there's 7 of them that we're going to touch on. The first 3 is listed on the screen, and we start with informed consent. Now, for us in this particular module, there is an informed consent already as one of the annexures that's designed for us. And so we're populating that information with the needed details to align to our studies. But basically, informed consent means that we are going to give our participants, I said students on the slide, but our participants, we're going to give them the details of our study. And we're going to give them that detail and ensure that they know exactly what they're getting themselves into, and they give their consent for the full picture of it. So you can't share half or just what you think, just for them to buy into it. But you must share the full details, even when you think the full details might push them away or scare them a bit. Give it to them and let them enter into your study with their eyes open. The second one is collecting data. You have to prioritize the physical and psychological comfort of your participants. And this implies that you inform them if and how their identities or sensitive personal information will be protected. You avoid situations where they need to answer potentially that will embarrass them. You avoid wasting their time, and you train properly on any research assistants or anybody who's going to help you to do exactly and replicate exactly what your vision was for your study. The third one is sensitive information. Some research studies reveal sensitive information about your participants. You need to protect that information. You cannot share it or in any way write about it where someone can identify who you're talking about. In some studies, we give incentives, and this could be a debate where some of us would feel, yes, it is needed, or some would feel it causes a bit of bias. If you're paying someone, they're going to do what they think you're paying them for. So it is a bit of a debate in some circles, but in my studies, for example, when I have my participants come together, I do say there'll be coffee and something to eat. And generally, students are going to come because they would like that freebie to eat something or to have a takeaway of something. And many feel that that could be a bias of its own because I'm going to get students who only want to eat and then come answer the questions. And will they probably answer honestly, or are they answering so they can have access to whatever they are going to receive? So that is also something that we need to consider when we give incentives. Consider the ethical implications for incentivizing the involvement of your participants. And then also find ways to rather avoid it so that you don't sit with data that you can't fully trust that it is an honest reflection, or did you buy them to participate. The next one is to avoid harm. I think this one is probably clear, where we don't want to ever cause our participants any harm. And this does not necessarily mean physical harm. It could be emotional harm. It could be where they are experiencing past trauma or a reminder of things that are unpleasant and they don't necessarily want to. Where you're asking questions in a group setting that could expose someone or make them feel uncomfortable, or creating a situation where the participants' future prospects may be harmed. So you giving them ideas of something that could come in the future that they might seem or relate to as harmful. And then you conduct a focus group in such a way that some participants feel their contributions are less intelligent, less relevant, and less valuable. I always find that to be tricky because the questions are standard questions, and so I can't always judge how they will perceive it. And so generally, I try to ask the questions in a way that is simplistic and not use big, elaborate academic terms as we sometimes do, because we might make someone feel that they have to ask, what do you mean by that term? And so ask it simplistically, open layman's terms where everybody can relate, in order to ensure that if there are people who are not understanding that particular term or on the same level as others, that they don't feel exposed in your presence. And then the textbook is clear about differentiating between confidentiality and being anonymous. Confidentiality means that the participant's information is known to you and you don't use it in your research explicitly. So when I am confiding in you, you know exactly who I am, but you're not going to write it in a way that anybody else can notice that that was my information. Anonymous, on the other hand, means that the researcher will not include the participants' real names, and you are not able to match the identity to the responses as well. So here you are not going to include, and we call it using pseudonyms, where you can use fake names and rather describe or use alternative ways to refer to the participant. You can say participant 1, participant 2, or institution 1, institution A or B, or you can give new names of made up institutions that don't exist in order to protect the and remain anonymous for who you're working with as your participants or your sample. And then lastly, you avoid deception, avoid untruths, avoid half-truths or not telling something in a way that you're trying to sugarcoat it. Be as detailed and as direct as you can in order for people not to interpret what you meant differently. If you tell an untruth, we can all walk away with a different opinion of what you actually meant. And so basically those are key elements of considering your participants in your research in an ethical manner. I'm going to conclude the last slide and then come to the chat and maybe engage on any questions that you might have. So in conclusion of this ethical consideration section, I thought it was meaningful to ensure ethical research in your own study. The following key aspects are mentioned in your chapter. Number one, draw up an ethical code of conduct for yourself, for your study. Sometimes we don't necessarily share this ethical code of conduct. Sometimes it's just merely a guide that you will reflect on as you progress through your research. And sometimes you get the opportunity to implement or write it into your write-up. It depends on the word count and what's allowed and what's requested of you. But ideally, you have some kind of guidelines for yourself so that you can make sure you tick the correct boxes. I think for ISTAS 3, I loaded a cheat sheet almost that was listing a number of ethical considerations to think about. I use that cheat sheet to help me tick the boxes as I progress through my research. I don't necessarily use it. That's a guide for me to ensure that I'm doing everything I need to do. Then learn from other researchers. So it's important that you collaborate as a team, and we'll start using our photo circle app from next week, where we start reflecting and learning from each other what we are doing in our research now that our proposals are more or less taking shape. Familiarize yourself with ethics for teachers. And this is just a matter of teaching yourself to do something for the sake of it being the right thing to do. Not necessarily being rewarded for it, not necessarily because you watched, not necessarily because you want to be acknowledged for it, but merely because it's the right thing to do. Then collaborate with other researchers. I think I've mentioned that, but the idea is that we learn and collaborate with each other. And then finally, consider the harm to yourself if you were the participant. And so this is one that I link to my ethical code of conduct. I write everything as if I'm one of the participants. And then I check if I am comfortable with the list of ethical considerations that I'm thinking of, if it applies to me, if I was a participant, and if it does not, I have to change it or reflect or remove it. And then lastly, I also consider the impact of my study to the broader community. So if my reasons are selfish or biased, I have to take a step back and reflect honestly to make the needed changes to ensure that I have ethical considerations throughout my study. Because while I'm conducting or collecting the data, it might not seem as if it's a big issue, but when you start to interpret your data, many of your participants might mention they felt uncomfortable or they have negative responses towards your data, and it's going to impact on what you can write about, or if you need to go back and collect another round of data. So it can be time consuming. So that's more or less what I wanted to touch on this evening. And I'm going to go to the chat in a bit and come back to how or where we are in terms of our planning. So I've got one on the chat that says, if we don't get ethical clearance, will our supervisor help us to fix it? So ethical clearance, I think you're referring to once we are done with task 3 and you start working on the summative, you're going to submit your ethical clearance to your supervisor will defend. That's what I call it for the lack of a better word. So your supervisor is going to defend your topic or explain it to a committee. And the committee can give feedback or they will accept your study. The feedback is generally for you to improve, and that's where you and your supervisor will have an opportunity to fix it. And then you get to resubmit. So it's not necessarily a rejection, it's merely yes, corrections, fix it and resubmit. So you have two options. It will either be accepted on the first round, or it will be accepted with the needed changes, and you'll go make the changes and upload or submit your summative or your entire proposal again. Is there any other questions regarding ethical considerations? I think it's quite clear. It's one of those aspects that you merely take from the textbook, take from your sources and link to yours and substantiate it well. It is not an aspect that you can misinterpret or get wrong. It's quite simplistic or straightforward in my perspective. But if you still find it difficult to make the links to justify the steps you've taken, reflect back on chapter 18 again and align your thoughts exactly with the type of study that you are using. So if you are following a quantitative study, consider justifying and the ethical considerations that align with quantitative. If you are doing a qualitative study, remember it's full of bias. Try and find ethical considerations that show you are aware of it and you are going to alleviate it in certain ways. And then the most important is to protect your participant. Ensure that they feel protected. If that's what comes across in your writing, then the ethical consideration section will be easy to mark and understand. Okay, so before I exit my live chat on the screen, on the 27th next week, we are going to reflect on our full proposals again, and we're going to dive back into Learning Unit 3 again, and we're going to home in or just openly discuss the studies that we have, how far our proposals have come. So I'm going to ask you to come to that session with as much questions regarding your proposal as possible. And where I can't answer, I will tap into your supervisor's minds, get the answers for you and align accordingly. But it is an open discussion for all of us to collaborate and find the clarity. At the end of this particular module, there should not be a reflection of I didn't get the help or I couldn't voice my opinion or I couldn't ask. So please note the 27th is an open floor for you to prepare and come with as many questions as you possibly can. And then on the 3rd of September, it's our last session before you have the mid-semester break. And we're going to have an ICE task session where I give you ICE task 4 in discussion, and you will go and do it over the break, and we'll set a deadline for it later in September when you come back. So you'll be able to work on it during the break for as much time as you need. So you'll have 3 weeks to work on it, and I'll set a deadline after our first check-in when you come back so that I can see if you're clear and then set a deadline. So it will be somewhere in the last week of September. So I'm going to go back to the Learn platform to see your interactions on this side, and then we can conclude. So do you have any questions regarding this particular chapter or discussions that we have this evening? If you are, can you please give me an emoji? How are you feeling? And we can call it. So just how are you feeling? Are you okay? Is the content understandable? Are you good? I'm just going to wait for a couple of responses. Is trustworthiness similar to the last ethical consideration that you mentioned? Sorry, can't recall the name, or if it's based on protecting the information. I'll just go back to my slides on this side. Second to last. Okay, let me go back. Any other questions anyone want to ask? And then we are done for this evening. Second to last, we're speaking about anonymous, but I guess we can discuss it shortly on the call if you can stay behind. It's about being anonymous. That was the second to last point. I think Nawal is mentioning it as well. Can we have ICE task 4 that is a graphic map of our research task? Is that the same thing? We have an ICE task 4 that is a graphic map of our research task. Is it the same thing? Yes and no. I'll share an example of what it would look like. It depicts your entire research project, and there's I think they call it an appendix already loaded for you that you just need to work or work from as a guide. But I will dive into it and prepare for next week to unpack ICE Task 4 as a collective. And then you can start working on it. But yes, there's an appendix. We're going to dive into it, unpack it, and you'll know exactly. But you use that and populate your ICE task, your proposal, and on that graphic discussion or display of your study. Okay, it's 8:05, so I'm a bit wary of time. I'm going to stay behind. Nozipo, if I didn't answer your question fully, you may please stay behind. But the rest of